Alright, we're going to continue with finding trig values, but instead of working in terms of x, y, and r as we were doing in the earlier section, we're going to find these trig values by using our identities. Okay, so when you do your homework, make sure you use your identities. That's just giving you the practice on how to use those, because I'll have different problems on the test, that the problem itself may look the same, but yet I'm asking you to work it different ways. Alright, so this says to use Pythagorean identities to find the following. Okay, so you're asked to find cosine, but you are given that sine theta is equal to square root 3 over 2, and that your angle is in the second quadrant. Okay, so using your Pythagorean identities, of course you've got, you're asked to find cosine. You can actually use any, you could use this one. Of course you'd have to do some work to get cosine by itself, or you could just go directly to this one that already has cosine on one side by itself, and that'll just save you a little bit of work. But you are given sine, so you're allowed to now take that value and substitute it in. Alright, so I'm just going to write down my identity. I have cosine theta is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus sine squared. Okay, we'll talk about the plus minus in just a minute. Let me just come down here. Alright, my sine value is square root 3 over 2. But then I do have to square that because this is sine squared. Alright, so we'll do the arithmetic on that in just a second. Now, the fact that you are in the second quadrant, so this goes back to the all students take calculus. You are asked to find the value for cosine, and you're in the second quadrant, and cosine will be a negative value in the second quadrant. So like I said, just go back to that all students take calculus that we had learned in the previous section. Okay, now let's take care of squaring our fraction here. So that's going to give us 3 over 4. Okay, so now we need to do the 1 minus 3/4, of course, which will give us 1/4. Now 1 and 4 are both perfect squares, so you can take the square root of numerator and denominator. So square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2. So your value for cosine is negative 1/2. And yes, you could have worked this using x, y, and r as we did earlier, but like I said, they're wanting you to have the practice of using these identities. Okay, next one that we're going to look at. This time we're asked to find cotangent if sine is equal to 2/3. Now, you do not have one that directly has cotangent and sine both in it. So a couple different things that you could do here, because like I said, there's a couple of ways. There's more than one way you could go here. If you wanted to, let's see, if you know what sine is, then we could find cosine, which is actually what we just did on the previous problem. So if you wanted, like I said, we could find cosine just like we did a while ago, since we know what sine is. And if you know sine and cosine, you actually could then go back to your ratio identity, in which cotangent is cosine over sine. Okay. You could even go straight right here to this one. Since you're given sine, now I know sine is not in this one, but here you have cosecant, and that's the reciprocal of sine. So we could actually work with this one. Let's just go with this one. That way we're using a different identity this time to help us out. Okay, so what you need to know from here is that cosecant Again, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so that's going to be equal to 3 over 2. Alright, so I'm fixing to use 1 plus cotangent squared is equal to cosecant squared. Alright, so I can substitute in my 3/2. So that's going to make this equal to 9/4. Okay, so now I'm going to subtract 1. So that's going to give me 5/4. So if you do your 9/4 minus 1, that'll give you 5/4. Alright, now we're looking for cotangent. Of course, what I have at this point is cotangent squared, so we need to take the square root of both sides. Of course, when you take square root of both sides, you have your plus minus. Alright, we'll decide plus minus in just a second. Let's go ahead and take the square root of the fraction that I have here. So that's going to end up giving, of course, square root of 5. And then square root of 4 would just give me 2. Alright, if you look back at the top, you're told that you are in the second quadrant. If you are in the second quadrant, the only thing that is positive in your second quadrant is sine and cosecant. Of course, that's neither one of the trig functions that I have here, so that means my value is negative. So you're still continuing to use that all students take calculus. Okay, next one. Okay, on this one you're asked to find secant and you are given tangent. So actually the one that you're going to want to use here would be this one, because this identity here relates your tangent and your secant right there. Alright, so let me write down our identity. Okay, so I take my 7 over 24 and substitute that in. But I do have to square that. Okay, now you can just type this in your calculator all in one step if you'd like. Okay, so give me just a second to get that done. Okay, so I have that is 625 divided by 576. Okay, now that's secant squared, so I still need to take square root of both sides. Alright, square root of 625 is 25, and let's see, square root of 576, I believe, is 24. Yes, it is. Okay, now you're not directly given the quadrant this time. You're just told that cosine is negative. Okay, so cosine is going to be negative in the second quadrant and in the third quadrant. Because if you're less than 0, that means you're dealing with something that's negative. Okay, so I've got to have something else here now to let me decide between those two quadrants. And that's going to come in right here. The value that you're given for tangent is positive, and tangent is going to be positive in the first quadrant and in the third quadrant. So see, if you notice, what you have here is that meeting both of these conditions, that's going to require the third quadrant. Okay, so now I know exactly which quadrant I'm in. Now, in your third quadrant, the only thing that's positive in the third quadrant is going to be tangent and cotangent. So actually your answer to this one would have to be negative 25 over 24 for your answer.